So let's now talk about interviews and focus groups. Essentially, interviews are where you interview an individual, sometimes more than one, but typically it's a one to one interview with one individual. Focus groups are where you get a group in and you have a particular topic that you want them to discuss. In both cases, you're going to be recording the session and then afterwards you're going to be transcribing it. We don't really recommend you use transcription services. In fact, we don't allow it on our courses just because the transcription is part of the process. It's part of your data analysis. As you're transcribing and writing everything out, you're getting familiar with your data. Having said that, most online recording devices now, like Teams, for instance, they can automatically transcribe. So that's fine if it's within the system that you're recording anyway, this automatic transcription feature, but it means that you must check it line by line. Once it's been transcribed, you would then analyze that data, usually with some kind of qualitative analysis, maybe a thematic analysis where you identify the main themes that come out in the data. So it can be quite time consuming to gather the data. Unlike questionnaires, where you basically just send the questionnaire out there and as many people as possible can fill it in, with interviews, you're probably looking at a smaller number of participants, but you're probably looking at quite time consuming data collection for each one. Usually at least an hour per participant to do the session. Maybe the session's only 30 minutes, but you've got setup and all of those kinds of things. And also, of course, it means the participant is giving up more of their time to be able to speak with you directly. The other thing is that if you're looking at controversial or sensitive topics, then having the person actually there talking to you can make it a little bit more challenging. So there may be more ethical constraints. So if it's a questionnaire and it's completely anonymous and out there in the world, then even if somebody discloses something, there's nothing you can do. So actually, it's very clear that it's anonymous. There's no connection to your participants. That's very different if the person sat right in front of you and they make a disclosure. There is an obligation for you to take some kind of mitigating action or safeguarding. So it's a little bit different in terms of thinking about risk, and you need to factor that into your process, depending on the kind of topics that you're doing. With an interview, you also need to think about whether you're doing it in person or electronically. So online, maybe through video conferencing software. Both are great, but both carry different pluses and minuses. If you've had any training in remote therapy, then you're probably aware of the disinhibition effect and that people can be a little bit more open when they're online. But there's also higher risk factors. Somebody could just hang up at any time. It's more difficult to safeguard and check in with the person at the end and so on. So these factors all have to be taken into consideration when applying for ethics for these kinds of studies. Interview data is richer, it's deeper, you've got more qualitative content. Questionnaire data can be brilliant for getting large numbers and being able to run really solid inferential statistics. That can be really fantastic. But if you want depth, interviews are probably where you're going to go. There can be more challenges, though, with generalizing your findings, because with a questionnaire where you've maybe got data from 2,000 people, that's pretty generalizable. But if you've only interviewed 5 people, well, then actually, is that really enough to be able to say what you found is generalizable to anybody else? And does that matter? Is that something that you need to be able to say for your research question? So we go back to our research question. What is the best way of answering that question? If you need to be able to answer the question and generalize to a huge population and you just need a really surface level answer, questionnaires are the way to go. If you need more depth of analysis, but you're happy it potentially isn't generalizable in quite the same way, then maybe interviews or focus groups are the way to go. Thinking about focus groups versus interviews, most research tends to go down the interview path rather than the focus group path. Focus groups are more challenging. You're going to potentially have people influenced by the other people who are answering questions, the other people who are giving their opinions. So you might not get honest opinions. You might have a conformity effect, a compliance effect. You might start to see peer influences at play. So there's all kinds of other things to take into consideration with focus groups. Even if you're doing an interview or a focus group, you might want to start with an online questionnaire. What I mean by that is you could have your advert for participating in our study. Here's our study. If you'd like to participate, follow this link. The link takes them to an online questionnaire, which gives them their information sheet. It gives them their consent form. It asks them some basic inclusion and exclusion criteria questions, maybe get some demographic data or some other information that you need. So you've got those kinds of elements in there. And then it maybe asks them for their availability so that it's all gathered in one place and you can access it really easily. And once they add their availability and their email address and consent to you contacting them to schedule the interview, you've got everything in one place. You can just download that information to be able to get in touch with them. So even if you are planning an interview or a focus group, or I'm going to talk in a little bit about interventions, you might still want to design a questionnaire just to be able to do that initial stage. Obviously, with interviews and focus groups, you are going to be there, either in person or online. And so there's an element of what you might bring, potential bias, potential influence on the participants. So all of those things have to be factored in. So think really carefully about what kind of research question you've asked and what the best way to gather that information is.